across the southern province of Suwayda, where heavy fighting between Druze, Bedouin armed groups and government forces has resulted in hundreds of casualties. The Syrian presidency announced a comprehensive ceasefire on Saturday, citing the need to prevent further bloodshed, protecting all minorities and sects in the country. Let's now have a listen to what Syrian leader Ahmed al-Sharaa had to say.
إننا إذ نشكر العشائر على مواقفها البطولية، لكننا ندعوها للالتزام التام بإيقاف إطلاق النار والامتثال لأوامر الدولة، وعلى الجميع أن يتفهم أن هذه اللحظة تتطلب وحدة الصف والتعاون الكامل من أجل تجاوز ما نمر به جميعا. تلتزم الدولة السورية بحماية الأقليات والطوائف كافة في البلاد، وهي ماضية في محاسبة جميع المنتهكين من أي طرف كان، ولن يفلت أي شخص من المحاسبة. ونحن نتبرأ من جميع الجرائم والتجاوزات التي جرت سواء كانت من داخل السويداء أو خارجها، ونؤكد على أهمية تحقيق العدالة وفرض القانون على الجميع.
Well, the ceasefire came after a US brokered agreement between Syria and Israel. US Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barrack confirmed that both countries had agreed to a truce supported by regional powers including Turkey and Jordan. The ceasefire aims to end violence in Suwayda, a region with a significant Druze population. Despite the ceasefire, fighting between Druze and Bedouin groups continued on Friday. The Syrian government has redeployed forces to restore order, but the situation remains unstable. The international community is watching closely, hoping the ceasefire could lead to a more lasting peace. Well, welcoming Ross Feingold once again back to join us and talk about this issue, which seems to have come to some conclusion. Ross, let's get your first initial reaction to that announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Syria. And will it actually change the situation on the ground in these regions of Syria that are minority-led?
To take your second question first, is it going to change the situation on the ground? In the coming days, yes. I think the parties, at least as of now, are committed to the ceasefire, so hopefully it will hold for the coming days. Will it hold over the medium or long term? There's really no way to know, and a lot of that really depends on what kind of policies the new Syrian government implements and how this new Syrian government demonstrates that it will treat minorities equally as it does treat the Sunni majority. To go back to your first question, one of the things that's really interesting about this process over the past few hours and days is the involvement of the United States, because at first glance the United States might have taken the view that this is really an internal matter in Syria. It doesn't create much of a risk for regional security. It's not really a risk to the national security of the United States or United States interests in the region. This was really very much localized fighting between Bedouin and the new Syrian government on one side and the Druze minority on another side. However, the United States has taken an interest in ensuring for lack of a better word, the success of the new Syrian government. President Trump met with the president when Trump was in the Middle East. President Trump really didn't have to do that, but he wanted to make some gesture to the new government. It was probably at the request of Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf countries, and President Trump agreed to do that. And in addition, the United States has removed sanctions that had been in place on Syria, which really is another gesture towards the new government that the United States, as of now, wants it to succeed. And then finally, we have the involvement of the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, who's also a special envoy for Syria, Ambassador Barrack. So the United States seems really committed to ensuring a peaceful Syria at the moment. And one part of that then becomes putting pressure on Israel to agree to the ceasefire. Because, we might have taken the view that the Trump administration is such a strong supporter of Israel and has such good relations with Prime Minister Netanyahu that the United States would have just given Israel a free hand to conduct military operations in southern Syria. But it appears that the United States did put some pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire.
Yes, and Ross, just quickly before we do move on, I want to build on the point that you've made about sanctions. Of course, Syria facing over a decade of regional instability and the ousting of Bashar al-Assad after such a long time in the grips of a civil war. Do you think that move by some Western nations to lift sanctions on Syria may have come too soon, given the instability that we're now seeing play out still in the country following those decisions?
Certainly there were cynics. If we go back to last December when the change in government occurred, when Bashar Assad fled the country, there were cynics who said that given the recent or long-term history, Syria is a country that needs a strong leader. Otherwise, you're going to have chaos with minorities who do have weapons fighting to preserve their safety in the face of what might be a vindictive majority after the majority Sunnis were repressed for so many decades by Assad the father and Assad the son. So there certainly were people who warned against this situation, and they said, well, we should go slow on sanctions relief because the new government needs to really show that it's going to be a government for all Syrians and not just for the Sunni majority. But I think there's some key players, stakeholders in this discussion, and that's Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. I don't think they want to see any more chaos in Syria. They've had enough of that. They may have had parties that they favored and armed groups that they favored over the preceding 10 years of civil war. But I think the Gulf states are very much incentivized to see Syria recover. We have the recent investment commitment from Dubai for the Syrian ports, and that's a positive step. And I think they're just tired of chaos. They're tired of refugees. They're tired of people dying. So I think the Arab countries of the Gulf states specifically, they want to see Syria succeed. So I think they provided that feedback to the Trump administration and to European countries as well, that the sanctions should come off sooner rather than later.
Ross, thank you ever so much for that deep insight. Thank you for your time. We will